Hey, everybody. Welcome once again to our bi weekly What's This Bird live session here. You may notice that I am joined by someone who is not Greg Neese this week. Whenever Greg Neese is unable to join us, we tend to cast around and pull up Ted, frequently last minute. And he joins us. For those of you who might not know, we do this bi-weekly. We will pull some photos from our What's This Bird Facebook group. If you're not familiar with that, it is essentially a crowdsourced bird identification group. We are live there, and we're happy to chat with some people who have any questions. So I've pulled some interesting photos from that group, and if anyone out there watching on any of our streams, we are live on Twitter, YouTube, and in Facebook. I'm trying to keep an eye on all of them. If you have any questions about birding, bird ID, anything that has to do with birds, we are not picky here at the ABA or on What's This Bird. We are happy to answer all your questions. Please let us know in the comments, and I will be keeping an eye on all of those as best I can to it. Oh, we got someone from Puerto Rico. Hello, Birding Tours PR on Hola, bienvenidos. Yeah. So Ted, for those of you out there who might have listened to the ABA podcast, the American Birding Podcast yesterday, it was you and I then, and it's you and I now. Have things
Back
changed
again.
in the last week since we talked?
Yeah, so I remember one of the themes we talked about, and I think that was back on March 2nd, I want to
Mm-hmm.
say, and today's March
Oh boy, 10 days
12th. So
ago.
10 days later is
Oof.
I was lamenting the absence of first of years or first of seasons, and at that time on March 2nd. However, since then the floodgates have opened.
Yeah.
So we have killdeer everywhere, cinnamon teal everywhere. I've had a couple of greater yellow legs. So sort of our early season stuff is starting to come back. Still no common grackles, a bird you and I talked about
Yeah.
back on the second.
Yeah,
They'll
they're
be
flying over
back
my
just a
house
little bit
every once in
later,
a while.
and you're probably seeing the first of the tree swallows pretty soon. Osprey maybe in a week or so. We have to get past some fairly dramatic weather first, but by this time next week, I imagine some additional first of seasons, first of years will be coming in.
Yeah, I need to get out. I haven't been super, I admit, paying attention to stuff, but a lot of things are the same as it was, and that whole big long March stretch here in the southeast is a slow one.
Mm.
It's usually things are going to start ramping up again in early April, and then it's kind of a slow roll up to the big rush in late April, early May here in the southeast. So nothing has changed a lot. So I could have gone out this morning and gotten exactly the same list. Although I will say that the trees are budding quite a bit more than they were on March 2nd when we talked. So we will
I
be.
can't even imagine such a
Whoa.
thing. Yeah, yeah. Well, sometimes when we have really warm and sunny weather, we'll get sort of bud bursts by late April, but we can easily wait until the third week of May before the cottonwoods and
It
such are
is the
starting to
worst
come out.
part
So,
about birding in the southeast. Everyone
yeah,
complains
that's right. You
about.
guys have leaves.
We have fully leafed out by the time all the warblers get here, so
That's
it's
right.
it's like it's very hard to find them. Not like up in the Great Lakes where
Mm,
the budding is relatively late and the warblers are
right.
arriving ahead of it. Oh, Gabriel Lugo, that's who it is. Yeah, he Gabriel was a guide at one of the ABA events back when we used to have ABA events in Puerto Rico.
And we will
Oh,
again
that's
one
many
of
years ago.
the years or
And we will
weeks or
again, hopefully this year. Things are. I don't know about you, Ted. That reminds me. I don't know if it's the arrival of spring, the warm weather. Like I'm in shorts and sandals for the first time this year already, and lots of people getting vaccines in their arms. I'm feeling more optimistic this week than I have
Yeah, yeah, no,
in a very long time.
yeah, in a very sort of global sense, I think that's the case. I sort of blew right past this. We're not going to have warm weather and shorts and shirt sleeves for quite a number of days here yet. But no, I share your sort of optimism more broadly speaking. It's a great sort of turn. And I guess today is this is the 12th, right? And it was
It is the
13th
12th.
last year when school was canceled, and they told us it
Yeah.
would go all the way till April 15th or something like that. So it's a grim 1 year uh, anniversary, if we want to call it that. But as you said, I think things are looking up.
It's interesting the bookends of it all. At almost exactly 1 year, everything was shutting down 1 year ago, and now things are slowly. We're seeing some green shoots of things opening back up and people getting back to what they were doing. It's
Yeah.
exciting.
We had a bird walk back on Sunday here. This actually the same place that I went birding at during our March 2nd conversation, and the estimate was that more than 100 people showed up. Now, don't panic about a super spreader event. The city actually has us on a very tight leash, and we had probably about 10 leaders and broke into groups of always 10 or fewer, and with actually pretty strict distancing and masking protocols. The city of Lafayette is quite stringent, which is wonderful about that. But it does go to show that you can't bird in groups. You just have to bird in small groups, and you can do so safely as well.
It seems to me that that's the sort of thing that even post-pandemic will be, pretty exciting to do. You'll have more volunteers, more smaller groups. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of birding, and birding in groups is fine. I don't necessarily like birding in very large groups, but small groups is fantastic, and it feels like that's the sort of situation we'll want to be in once everybody's vaccinated.
So we've been spoiled. Yeah, these outings going back to a year and a half ago were dozens or scores of people with one sort of harried leader, and we've really kind of cultivated this community of and it's really gratifying, sort of newer, younger, sort of just more recently, I guess, sort of recruited into the birding community leaders. Totally. And again, when I said 10, it may have been more like 12 or 13 leaders. We had a lot of folks who were leaders as well as participants.
Yeah, I've talked about this on the podcast before. It doesn't take much to be a leader. I think a lot of people who are maybe relatively novice birders, or maybe people that got into birding in the pandemic, may feel as though they are not, ready to be a bird leader. But I mean, you totally can do it. It's about sharing that enthusiasm. It's about identifying most of what you see. I mean, even people who are experienced birders aren't going to identify every single thing that they see.
I know we weren't going to go in this direction, but I can't resist. Back to that outing on Sunday. We had 8 or 10 pods of birders going out, and the group that came back with by far the most successful birds and arthropods had two leaders. The senior leader was 16 years old, and the junior leader was 9 years old. And they did better than any other group, the bird list, as well as some actually a really amazing arthropod and other cool arthropods as well. So, that the 9-year-old has only been doing this for 9 years at most. So no excuse if you've been bird watching for 8 or 9 or 10 years.
Or two.
Or two, yeah.
But leading a bird tour group is like managing expectations and knowing where the bathrooms are is pretty much what it is.
But again, I just want to point out that arguably the most successful group was led by a 16-year-old and a 9-year-old. Yeah, so it can be done.
Get out and lead those tour groups if you think you can do it. You learn by experience for the most part, and you gotta get that experience to do it. Yeah, the Gabrielle on asks again. Confidence coming back. Those who are getting vaccinated are the ones asking for tour info. Yeah, I'm glad to hear our friends in the tour industry are seeing that sort of return, because I know that they were hurt really hard by the pandemic, and it makes me feel good to know that you guys are out there still with it, and hopefully going to get a rush of new pandemic birders interested in going beyond their local patches. Not that there's anything wrong with your local patches, but I know I'm anxious to get out of it. So
sure.
All right, Ted, shall we talk about some photos that I have for us?
Yep. Ready as I'll ever
be.
Let's
pull them all up. This first one from New Jersey. This one was very recently posted. I think it may have been posted today to What's This Bird. So what are we looking at here? What are the first things that stand out to you on this image? Like what kind of birds are we even looking for? Let's go start with family.
I'll answer that in a second. Let me just make one comment. I'm in a very different digital venue than you are right now. So if I'm commenting on the completely wrong bird, please let me know about it. But
I will.
We have blue sky. We have blue
sky and two birds. Yes.
Two birds in New Jersey. Okay. Very good. Right. Yeah. So this is an interesting photo. I don't mean this in a snide or catty way. It's not a great photo, but that's fine. The whole point of What's This Bird is to look at images that are not necessarily, Brian, small quality, tack sharp, frame filler sorts of images. So, the way I'm seeing it here, I'm seeing water birds. These just look like water birds to me. Yeah. They could be anhingas. They're very long necked and long winged and long tailed, but I don't think they're anhingas. I'm pretty sure they're ducks. And I say that in part because of that kind of, I'd like to say flying bowling pin, that kind of pot bellied look with the skinny head like that. So
that's like grackles flying backwards.
Yeah, there's that. Oh, well, maybe these are grackles then. I hadn't even thought
going
of
the
that.
other direction. No.
grackles or pheasants or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So after you've been doing this for a while, and you start to put ducks into groups, diving ducks, dabbling ducks. These look like dabbling ducks to me in the genus Anis. So that's the mallard
The
genus.
big kind of skinny head, the long neck is a very honest sort of
Yep.
look compared
And,
to
and in
the
the old days,
IPS.
we could call them all Anis, but that genus has been fractured into multiple genera right now. So one bird that comes to mind here for me, I'm assuming these are the same species. That's not necessarily the case, but I would assume that would be the American black duck. It's a very dark bird, dark bellied. It's a fairly large bird. These look largish to me, and it flashes brilliant white in the wings, which you can sort of see on the, to me, it's the right bird, the trailing bird. So black duck, I think, is a possibility. Black ducks are certainly in New Jersey. Another bird, though, that comes to mind is the northern shoveler. It's a very long-necked bird with a very, very, very long bill. And the females are quite dark-bodied, and they have contrasting white wing linings. So I would lean shoveler, and I would even lean females on both of these. But if you told me it was a black duck, I could accept that. But I'd go with female northern shovelers.
Yeah, my first impression of these birds when I saw this photo was also northern shoveler, and it's because of the neck is very skinny, but that front of the neck, I mean, it's got a very long, apparently very broad bill, and that's not unique to the Anis genus ducks, but this one just seems like especially long and broad to me. So I would be with you on the northern shoveler. A lot of ducks moving right now, and that's a good one to know because they are pretty distinctive in flight just because of that super long, broad bill, even at a fairly great distance if you're looking at a flock of ducks.
Yep. I have a clarification and an encouragement. So shovelers aren't an Anis anymore. They're spatula.
No, you're right. They're spatula.
Spatula.
In the spatula genus.
And then the species name is Clypeata, which means a shield. So the bill is supposedly shield shaped. And
it's a long
if
shield.
you ever get a chance to watch it,
middle ages, arrow archer shields.
Yeah, right. But if you ever get a chance to watch a shoveler flying straight overhead, that bill is incredible from beneath. It's just, it's very broad, very large. It is sort of shield shaped, and I guess it's a spatula-like as well. So yes, spatula, formerly Anis and Clypeata. It's a dabbling duck. It's closely related to the mallard in the genus Anis.
It is interesting because when they split the Anis genus, they split the teals, right? Because now blue-winged teal and cinnamon teal, I think, are also spatula, whereas green-winged teal is still an Anis. It goes to show you that those birds are not really all that related, despite being teals.
Yeah, and on an esoteric note, I can't help mention that can't resist mentioning that I still have problems with the eBird catch-all teal spa because I think now they really mean spatula, so shoveler should go in that, but green-winged teal shouldn't. But I've been set straight from on high at Team eBird. That's teal spa means birds with the name teal, with the name teal in the actual name. So those birds and Gargany. I don't know. Gargany's also.
I guess Gargany would be a teal too. Yeah,
because it's in spatula. So anyhow, these are ducks. They're dabbling ducks. I think they're shovelers. I could kind of, if you told me there's black ducks, okay, but I'm going to go with shoveler.
Yeah. All right. Let's move on to our next bird. Okay. Early spring to me always says sparrows in the same way that late fall says sparrows. They tend to be, late movers in the fall, early movers in the spring, heading back up north. And this is one that I liked this photo because I usually associate this species very much with snow. And, they tend to come to feeders in the snow. Otherwise, they're actually somewhat difficult here. But I'm struck by the large body, the large head, and the relatively short tail on this guy. What do you think, Ted?
And I'll add, unless I missed your saying it, the fact that it's sort of brilliantly rufescent all over. The sparrows are sort of brown and gray and some black and white. This, I think, is going to be sort of the most reddish sparrow overall in the ABA
think of another
area.
Sparrow that's more red.
There's towies, but that's all sort of on a particular part of the bird. But for these reasons, because it's a big red sparrow, it's a bird called the fox sparrow. And in fact, the eastern and northern subspecies is often called the red fox sparrow, because there are
Yeah.
three other fox sparrows, a thick-billed, a slate colored, and a sooty, which aren't nearly as red. But this is the red fox sparrow, the one that is a fairly common bird across the eastern United States. I also just note that it's so red that I actually think a brown thrasher is a possible point
Yeah.
of
It's
confusion
the
here.
same red. Yeah.
But yeah, it's the same red, it's the same plumage, but there are two major differences. The bills are really different. The thrasher has a long decurved bill. It's very slender. It's used for like plucking arthropods out of crevices. And then the tail is much longer,
Much longer.
on the thrasher. So I could see this bird being called a thrasher, but um, the plumage is superficially similar, but the structure is really way off for a thrasher.
Ted, what's your take on fox sparrow taxonomy?
Hmm. Well, yeah, this is one of these
I mean,
birds
you talked about the western fox sparrows, the slate
yeah,
color,
so I
the
mean,
thick billed.
right. So this is one of these birds that for, I don't know, I'd say at least 30 years has been sort of spoken in hushed tones as a possible 3 or 4 way split. But it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
And I'm not, to the extent that I can read the tea leaves here, aware that it's an imminent split either. But yeah, so the basic idea is that this bird, what we now call the fox sparrow, it's in its own genus Passarella, comprises distinct populations. The one that's known to probably the largest number of people in the ABA area is this one, the red fox sparrow. It's a Passarella iliac, I think. And then there's a suite of western fox sparrows. And what really complicates them is the farther west you get, each of those subspecies groups has lots of subspecies in it. And the sooty fox sparrow, which is the far west coast one, and it basically just hugs the west coast, getting up to Alaska. Someone's going to quote me because I'm going to be wrong here, but I want to say it has like 7 or 8 named subspecies, and some of them are really quite distinctive. So lots to muddle through there. And I think that sort of when you take a look at a sooty fox sparrow and a red fox sparrow, you think to yourself, how could they possibly be the same species?
I was just going to say, I saw my first sooty fox sparrow in Alaska many years ago, and it was like it was totally different.
Right.
Was like got a hood, like a real dark hood, not a lot of, it's all over just that real kind of sooty gray. It's a really striking bird.
Yeah, their songs and calls are different. The bird I grew up with was the eastern, or the red fox sparrow, and still every year when I hear so we have the slate colored fox sparrow here in Colorado. When I hear it singing, there's this kind of moment like, oh wait, that's right, that's what fox sparrows sound like in Colorado. It's a very different song from that beautiful sort of slurred whistle series that you get from the red fox sparrow. So anyhow, the reason I think that this hasn't gone very far is that where the red fox sparrow and the the western limit of its range, where it comes into contact with the sooty and the slate-colored fox sparrows, it's just sort of a jumble of genes out there, and nobody's figured out to the satisfaction of the American Ornithological Society just how much gene flow there is or isn't. So there are probably multiple species involved, but it's a tricky one.
Yeah, I have a question. I'm gonna pop over and go to our watchers on Periscope. Brant Schoenberg asks, "What's your take on the Texas Stellar Sea Eagle? Are you even aware of the Texas Stellar Sea Eagle?"
Oh yes. So
I don't know what to think about the Texas Stellar Sea Eagle.
So I'm not completely resistant to it. I gather there's some problems with all sorts of things. Who saw it, when it was seen, whether the photo's legit. I mean, so there's some sort of a birderly forensics going on here. I get all that.
Exactly. And the last I saw, just from glancing through the post on in the ABA's Rare Bird Alert group, is that some people went out to look for it today, and they found the stump it was sitting on. So people who are not aware of this, a really striking image of an adult stellar sea eagle, which is a extremely large bird of prey, typically found in East Asia, Eastern Russia, Japan, and was photographed apparently in Texas. And how a bird like that got from East Asia to Texas is a completely open question. I don't think anyone is doubting that is impossible that it could get there under its own steam, but it seems especially unlikely.
Yeah, so and that's what I wanted to sort of comment on. So I'm going to leave aside all the questions of, and I have no dog in this fight, but doctored photos, a mistake, a hoax. Yeah, leaving all that aside, I'm reminded of Guy McCaskey's quip that birds have wings and they use them. So there have been some pretty wild vagrants in the ABA area not all that long ago. I think of that great black hawk.
East Asian vagrants. Yeah, well, yeah. So two things: East Asian vagrants tend to show up all over the place, and
Mhm.
two, a Black Hawk from
Yes.
Mexico
So the Black
was
Hawk.
the
But I mean,
name.
Texas had a didn't Texas have a white wagtail recently? That's
Not that
way
long
off.
ago. Yeah,
I remember the first citrine wagtail in the ABA area was in Mississippi.
one of the great head scratchers of the ABA area status
And
and
so
distribution.
I guess I'll say I'm agnostic on this one.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also fairly accepting of the idea of vagrancy. Again, back to the quip that birds have wings and they use them. This is a bird that does disperse, and it's a very powerful flyer. And I I'm not prepared to say it's not a legit stellar sea eagle.
Who knows? Who knows?
Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, you look at things like great knot in West Virginia,
Yep.
sand plovers in Virginia and Florida. I mean, yeah, why is that more believable than a stellar sea eagle?
True.
Who knows? Anyway, back to our images. If anyone else has any questions about birds or wants to hear our hot vagrancy takes, please let us know in the comments. We are on Facebook, on YouTube, and on Periscope, on Twitter. I forgot that one. I always forget that one. All right, so we got a new bird up here, and I chose this one specifically to talk about after the fox sparrow, so I can switch back and forth here, because this is a bird that people might mistake a fox sparrow for, but it's a really good time to talk about use of structure, how we use structure to identify birds, because the colors, while not maybe quite as rich in this bird, are somewhat similar.
Yeah, so this is a very common bird, one of the most common, widespread, probably familiar birds in the ABA area. It's also very easy to misidentify. It has all sorts of sort of ID contenders. It is, as you can see, a reddish bird like our fox sparrow. It's not a fox sparrow. A couple things going on here. The bird's tail is quite long. I think it's even longer than it appears in this photo. I think we've got a little bit of tail foreshortening going on there. So it's also got very sort of coarse streaks all over the whole body.
Similar to our fox sparrow.
Similar to our, although really the whole body, just sort of coarse, indeterminate streaking everywhere. So to me, it's less blotchy, I guess, than the fox sparrow. To me, a sort of very long-tailed, brownish, reddish sparrow with coarse streaking everywhere is a strong candidate for the song sparrow. And then the question becomes like, why wouldn't it be some other bird like a savanna sparrow or a vesper sparrow or a fox sparrow? And those can sort of be ruled out bird by bird. But it's one of our larger sparrows, proportionally one of our longest tailed sparrows. And again, when I see a bird that just sort of is brown and red, mostly brown, streaked all over, has a long tail, I go right to a song sparrow. And then if I want to try out a more exotic hypothesis, like an out-of-season savanna sparrow or an out-of-range fox sparrow or something like that, I better be pretty careful. It's not just a song sparrow. It's a highly variable bird, by the way. This is from Georgia, so it's one of the eastern song sparrows. I mentioned, is it? Oh, cool. Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, so the fox sparrow has a lot of subspecies. At one point, I think the song sparrow had maybe more subspecies than any bird on earth or something like that. I don't know, maybe one of the wagtails had more, but like 56, 57, 58 subspecies. So tremendous variation. But that basic body plan of a large brown streaked sparrow with a long tail is a pretty good sign that you've got a song sparrow.
Yeah, the long tail is the thing that always stands out to me for song sparrows, and why I chose this picture, because it's more or less the same angle as the fox sparrow earlier, but you can definitely see the difference in the tail length. I'll switch back. You can see that fox sparrow has a little dinky tail, or song sparrow has a very long tail. Song is long, and when they fly, they like drag their tail behind them. It looks like it's very like a huge effort to drag that tail along behind them as they fly into a blackberry thicket and bury themselves in it. For the most part, yeah.
Hey, just a historical note, and I learned this not too long ago. So there are three birds in the song sparrow's genus, which is Melospiza. So that's the song sparrow, the Lincoln sparrow, and the swamp sparrow. The old names of these birds are quite curious. So the Lincoln sparrow used to be called, I'm not making this up, the Lincoln song sparrow, and the swamp sparrow used to be called the swamp song sparrow. So the question is, would the song sparrow have been the song sparrow?
Well, Melospiza melodia is like singing Finch.
but it was called the silver tongue. So back in the day, the two birds called song sparrows were the Lincoln sparrow and the swamp sparrow, but the bird we today call the song sparrow was called the silver tongue. I think because it had a silvery song.
Simpsons reference.
So it's Melospiza melodia, formerly the silver tongue, today the song sparrow.
Daphne Rose notes that the northwestern song sparrow seems very reddish, and she has misidentified them for fox sparrow.
Yeah, I agree. They're reddish and darkish. As you get even farther north, they get even darker and very large. The fox sparrows out in the Aleutians are, the size of good-sized thrushes. When you get far south into the desert Southwest, you have these really relatively small, relatively short-tailed, very pale song sparrows. So tremendous variation. What's curious, though, is that despite all that variation, they pretty much sound the same everywhere. They have that distinctive chep call that you hear year-round from all song sparrows. They have a high buzzy flight call, and then their songs, which are variable bird to bird, have that kind of pulsing, pumping sort of series of whistles, a trill, and then a mumble at the end. So they sure look different, but pretty much sound the same from sea to shining sea.
Yeah, from time to time down here in the Southeast, we do get the so most of the song sparrows we have throughout the year are these melodia birds. They're always all over kind of rufusy and buff. But we do get from time to time those darker birds that breed up in like the maritime provinces of Canada. I think that's the Georgiana subspecies. I was really bored one time a few years ago, and I pulled out the pile guide and tried to put the subspecific names to all the song sparrows that were hanging out at my feeder. And one of them, we have a couple of those really kind of darker, much grayer birds mixed in with our regular melodia birds like this one here in Georgia.
Yeah, another cool thing in addition to the plumage variation is a bill length as a function of microhabitat. So both the several subspecies that specialize around the coastal marshes of California, and then the subspecies like around the mid-Atlantic on the coast, have long bills, long feet, and strong feet, which they're adaptations for feeding in the mud. So they're sort of becoming like sandpipers or something like that. So the birds don't have any contact with each other, but due to local adaptation, the birds of the San Francisco Bay and like the Delaware Bay have morphological similarities.
Oh yeah, that's interesting. You note that because swamp sparrow, there's a very range-restricted subspecies of the Central Coast, coastal something. I don't know.
The coastal plain
swamp
sparrow.
Sparrow. Yeah, that breeds up in Delmarva, and then winters almost exclusively in the Albemarle Peninsula of North Carolina. I've never seen one that I was, certain was one, but
yeah, I gather I have very little experience with them, but they're long-billed. That's kind of
cool. That's supposedly what they are. Yeah, long-billed. Yeah. Hold on, John Lowry is pinging me a question. He says it's a birding question, and I'm going to tell him to take it to the "What's this bird?" We're live, John. Anyway, let's go to the next bird. We're going to go out west. I always get hit because I have an East Coast bias because I am I'm living on the East. But that's why it's always a pleasure to have you, Ted, because you are not. And so let's look at this guy. Is this a sparrow?
So I'm going to sort of give the answer away here. Roger Tory Peterson famously described the purple finch as like a sparrow dipped in raspberry juice. So it looks like a sparrow. It's a bird feeding, I think, on seeds. I see sunflower husks there on the ground with a big conical bill. So those are all good sparrow marks. But this bird looks like it's dipped in raspberry juice, which suggests to me it's going to be a finch. So we have two like that. Yep, we have several finches that are dipped in raspberry juice, and here's changing names again. I think they're now in the genus Hemerois, although I grew up with Carpodicus. But
so this is going from the same root as hemorrhage, like blood,
hemoglobin. Right. Yep, for sure. So so this is a finch, and it's has a pretty. Oh, by the way, it's quite colorful. So we're looking at an adult male finch here, and it's got a pretty plain breast. So house finch is probably out of the running. So we're down to the purple finch and the Cassin's finch. You're with me so far? You agree with this? I'm in the right genus?
I'm with
okay,
you.
cool.
Yes.
Okay. All right. And so in California, which is where this is from, it gets tricky because we have purple finches, but that's not the eastern subspecies of the purple finch. It's the distinctive western subspecies of purple finch
Yeah.
and Cassin's finch. And here's the really tricky thing: in the winter of 2020, 2021, there's been a major eruption westward of eastern purple finches. So it's possible that an eastern bird would actually reach California. So its Cassins are purple, and to me, this bird is not streaky enough and finely plumaged enough and sort of crested and crowned enough to be a Cassin's finch. So I'm going to go with purple finch on this one. Another reason I don't think it's a Cassin's finch is because the Cassin's finch's culmen, which is the top of the bill, is extremely straight and sharp, and this one looks a little bit rounded.
A curve, doesn't it?
Yeah, which all suggests a West Coast purple finch to me. You don't think
no,
it is?
And I mean, I think the consensus on What's This Bird was that this was a Cassin's finch because it's got it's brightest on the front of the crown. But I don't have any particular dog in this fight. Those are two groups of birds, two birds that I don't see that often. So I don't. And as I said, the Western purple finches always throw me.
Yep. Yeah. So, but wait, that may be the case. Nothing's ever definitive on this program. By the
Even
way.
with a photo as nice as this one.
Right. Yeah. So it is a good photo, but to me, a Cassin's finch would be sort of crisp, fine feathering everywhere. The head wouldn't be sort of smushed down like that. But I could well be wrong on that. At least we agree that it's one of two birds.
Greg Neese just popped in and said he thinks it's a Cassin's.
He thinks it's a Cassin's too. Well, I'm just joking. Yeah. Okay. So I will say, and this is a very sort of gratuitous remark here, but in real life we would be able to perhaps hear flight calls and hear song, and maybe look underneath the bird's tail. So, for example, the amount of streaking on the undertail coverage is a good way to tell the purple finch from the Cassin's finch. So, it's one of those sparrows dipped in raspberry juice. And if the consensus is going toward Cassin's finch, so be it. I'll tell you that if I saw a bird like this in Colorado, I would at least give thought to purple finch. But see, there I'd be dealing with the eastern purple finch, which has a more prominently marked face. So when you're comparing purple and Cassins in California, you have to recall that you're dealing with the less strongly marked of the purple finches. So don't know, but this suggests a purple finch to me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, sure. Let's go to something much more definitive. Scop, okay. Ted.
Right, scop.
Well, so back to waterfowl.
Okay, so I think this bird is, I'm playing a joke here, in definitive plumage. The adult male plumage, the definitive alternate plumage. So it's got a black head with a black butt, so that pretty much makes it a scop.
Oreo birds.
Yep, and it's got that vermiculated appearance to the upper surface there, the black and white, the very fine black and white, and then the black breast as well. So the hunters call these birds bluebills, and you can see the blue bill on this bird. So I don't think there's any doubt but that this is a scop. And then there's the notorious question of greater versus lesser scop, and there are a lot of tweeners out there. I have no problem with this being a lesser. It looks fairly classic to me. It's got that pointed head. It's peaked and sort of slightly crested. The bill, it's biggish, but by the way, I should say the greater scop has a big bill and the lesser scop has a small bill. But I don't see any big bulging black bill tip or bill nail on this bird at all. So a greater scop would usually show those marks. The other thing is that we're getting into the nitty gritty here, but a greater scop is typically more gleamingly white, which this one isn't. Yeah. And although it's a fairly dark photo here, I'm actually a weak believer in head color. Greaters usually do show the greenish tint, and the lessers usually show the bluish or purplish, and this looks closer to that. So if this bird dove and came back up as a greater scop, I've seen stranger things than that, but given this one photo of this bird, fairly nicely in profile, the head shape, the bill shape and color, the sort of weak supporting field marks of the extent and brightness of the white all suggest lesser scop.
Yeah, I'm with you on this one. The first things that stand out to me is, as you say, the lack of a strong nail. The big black spot on the tip of the bill. I found that to be one of the more consistent field marks for scop. And the head shape can be, if the bird is being very active, the head shape can be difficult to get your head around, so to speak. But this one generally looks like it looks like it has not been diving, so I think we can trust it a little bit more. It's got the kind of classic peak at the back of the head, which is usual. It's interesting you mentioned the head color. I do think it should not be the first field mark. It should not be the one thing that you use to identify it, but it's probably okay to have it be, as you say, a supporting field mark, fourth, fifth, sixth down the line. If everything else sort of checks out, it wouldn't necessarily be something I would use to identify it on its own, however.
Right. This is, I assume, a recent photo, or do we know?
Or early March, yeah.
Yeah, just a kind of comment about scop biology. So at least the last I heard, and listeners from Ontario or the Great Lakes could correct me if the story has changed, but numbers of both lesser and greater scop have really increased drastically in the past 25 years due to the invasion of non-indigenous mussels in the Great Lakes, and all sorts of problems there. But scop have been beneficiaries of that, but with a sort of dark twist. So these mussels are bioaccumulating mercury and other toxins, and the birds are really picking those up as well. So they sort of made a deal with the devil. Their numbers are exploding on the Great Lakes, especially the Western Great Lakes, Western and Southern Great Lakes, because of this. But they're possibly not surviving. Their young are not surviving because of all the mercury accumulation. Hey, one other thing on location. Sorry, back to that finch. It's California. But you have the location, right? Because that could help rule out.
Ooh, I don't know. I could probably find it.
I'm just saying that there are parts of California where you would get one finch or the other most of the time.
I want to say maybe it's was this the arrowhead lake bird? No, that was the woodpecker. That's going to come later. But
okay,
yeah, I can pull it up.
That's don't worry about it. But by the time you're over on the east side of the Sierra, Cassin's finch is far more likely than purple finch. So
I should have noted that. I knew that California always.
Yeah, right. Yeah, California in some ways has more biogeographic variation than the entire eastern United States and Canada.
This is Lake Arrowhead. So this is San Bernardino County.
Oh, which could go either way. So,
it doesn't.
Well, San Bernardino County, for those of you all out east, is gargantuan. It's larger than some whole eastern states. So, you could get purple and Cassin's in San Bernardino County. Okay,
all right,
that's fine.
Moving on.
All right, fair enough. Okay.
I like this photo because this was not taken in March, I should say. So maybe we can get us ready because a lot of these birds are sort of on their way to northern climes right now. I'm going to pull this up a little bit so I can see a little bit. There we go. See some of the stuff. I can move this photo around because there's a lot of things to see in this photo.
Mm-hmm.
But these are a bunch of swallows sitting on a pair of wires. And there's a lot of different swallows going on here. What are some of the things that stand out to you in this one, Ted?
Yeah. So first, something that stands out to me that has nothing to do with the identification of these birds, but it's a comment, is that I love photos like this. And if anybody is in possession of photos like this and wants to contribute them to our featured photo column in Birding Magazine, I would love to run these because it's really instructive. Quiz. Yeah, it's really, but with apparently, obviously multiple individuals, and we're going to see in a moment, multiple genera and species of swallows here. I love that sort of comparative study. So, one thing I think that we forget about when we see swallows of the same species altogether, just abstractions and field guides, is how variable they are in size. Mm-hmm. So if you go to, and again, I think we're looking at the same projection here, but the second to left bird on the upper wire, it's exceedingly small. So that all by itself in the ABA area pretty much tells us that we have a bank swallow. Yeah. The bank swallow it's actually one of the smallest passerines in the ABA area. It's tiny.
Yeah.
Look at the bill to tail. Bill length to tail tip length. I mean, it's smaller than most sparrows. It's a really, really, really small bird. So,
and I think that's the sort of thing that's really underappreciated by people who just look at those birds in photographs or in a field guide, right? Because you'll look at bank swallow and a northern rough-winged swallow, and you're like, oh, these are both sort of brownish white swallows. These might be very difficult to identify. But then you actually see a bank swallow flying around in a flock, and like you said, it is tiny, and it's got these really buzzy little wing beats that are super fast, and it is pretty distinctive in a flock of swallows.
Yep. So that small bird, by virtue of its smallness alone, is going to be a bank swallow, and for our listeners in Britain, the sand martin. That's the name that the bird goes by elsewhere. So then there are some other swallows on the upper wire there. Green above and white below in Indiana, that can really only be a tree swallow. So looks like the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 birds are all tree swallows. I think that bird, the brown bird in between the third and fifth birds, is a juvenile tree swallow, but I'm not sure of that. That could actually be a bank swallow. Nate, I apologize. I'm sort of looking at a distance here. So
no, I agree with it as well. I had trouble with that bird as well. It's definitely not as clear as the other bank swallow. I pulled the image down because as we're going up the wire, there are a couple other things to look at the very top that get cut off on our video.
Yeah. So but speaking of the topmost bird that's completely in the frame is a cliff swallow, and it's a very ruddy bird. In fact, part of its scientific name means fire. It's a sort of a fiery bird, and it's got those famous headlights, which are the sort of the spots or dots above the bill there. And when you see a reddish swallow with a short tail and a fairly medium to large size swallow, you're definitely looking at a cliff swallow. In Indiana, I should say. Now, if we were to move this, let's say, to New Mexico, then we're talking about, is there cave swallow in here? Is there violet green swallow in here? But I think in Indiana in July, we're dealing with pretty much only 6 possible species. And I see 3 of them on that upper wire. That bottommost bird's a cliff swallow, then a bank swallow, then tree, I think another tree, and then tree, and then cliff, and I can't tell what that is up there, but probably another tree swallow.
What about that giant one at the bottom, Ted?
Oh, right. I'm sorry. Oh, sorry. I just went by it too fast. So I was thinking that's another cliff swallow. The bottom on the upper wire, correct?
Really? You think that's a cliff swallow? I thought that was a purple martin.
Yeah, well, it's huge. Yeah, I'm looking at it sort of closely here now. Yes, just by virtue of its size. Yeah, that's a good point. It's really huge.
It's really big.
Yeah.
It is interesting that the largest and smallest North American swallows are sitting right next to each other.
Yeah. You can see that size difference. Yeah, now that I'm sort of even increasing the screen size here. Yeah, I'm not seeing the headlights at all on that bird. So I'm totally good with that for purple martin. And by the way, sort of a teachable moment here. Boy, when you get those big flocks of swallows on a wire, do look at them bird by bird by bird by bird. Purple martin's a rarity for us in Colorado.
There you go.
I'd feel awful if I overlooked a purple martin on the wires.
Well, they're back now here in the southeast and have been for a couple of weeks in some parts.
But I'm totally good with that as purple martin. It's funny. My mind goes to why aren't those trees? Why aren't those violet green swallows? Why aren't those cave swallows?
Right.
I think, but by virtue
West
of
Coast bias.
Of that West Coast bias, the hugeness of that bird. And I'm actually zooming in on it now, but no problem with that. I should note that there are purple martins farther west in actually in southwestern Colorado, then especially like in the drier pine woods of the Great Basin, the northern Mojave Desert, California, and so forth. And they're pretty similar to East Coast purple martins, although the females are appreciably different. A neat difference in behavior, though, is that as far as we know, Eastern purple martins only nest in human-made structures. And that's not a European colonial thing either. Apparently, by the time the very first, I don't know about Vikings, but the Middle Europeans were making their way to Middle European humans, that is to say, were making their way to what we now call Eastern North America. The indigenous Americans were also already creating nest sites and gourds and other structures for Eastern purple martins. So Eastern purple martins are completely won over by human-built structures, whereas Western purple martins are mostly tree nesters. So a little bit of a difference there in affinity for human beings.
I will say I was in Florida, and I found there's some purple martins that nest in wild natural cavities in Florida. Yeah,
I did not know that.
Like old pine or palm trees.
Oh, yeah. I'll be darned.
It's not
maybe they were Caribbean martins. No,
could have been. I didn't look that closely.
Okay, all right.
I just assumed. All right, so now we've got here a woodpecker. We're gonna stay. Oh, we'll go back to the west, California. This is interesting for birders who in the east might immediately take a look at this bird and think, oh, yeah, downy woodpecker. It's the kind of smallish, cutish black and white woodpecker. But because this is California, we do have to consider two more woodpeckers. The Nuttles, and the named after Thomas Nuttall, and the ladder-backed.
Right. So it is, in fact, one of those birds. It's not a downy woodpecker because it's got all that spotting on the flanks. Also, the pattern of the stripes on the head isn't really right for downy. So Nuttles versus ladder-backed is one that it's one of those unfortunate sort of default identifications for birders, kind of like with purple and Cassin's finches. Usually you can do it by range alone. Mm-hmm. And so Nuttles woodpecker is sort of the Pacific slope bird, and then ladder-backed is the interior, really actually, I think all the way to the Gulf Coast in Texas woodpecker. So typically, if you see a bird like this in Texas, well, it's obviously a ladder-backed. And if you see a bird like this in, let's say, Los Angeles, well, let's go farther, like Santa Barbara or somewhere, it's definitely going to be a Nuttles. But what about the birds where they come together? And do we have a location on this, or you're going to tell me it's also San Bernardino County?
So I may have gotten the finch and the woodpecker mixed up. Okay. I need to check and see. Yeah, go ahead and keep talking, and I will. Well,
okay. Despite not quite yet knowing the location, I think we actually do know what species this is. So it's a Nuttles woodpecker. Yeah. And okay, it's good to know. The reason why, here's how I think of the difference between the two. The Nuttles woodpecker is truly a black and white woodpecker, whereas the ladder-backed is sort of like a black and white and brown woodpecker. Yeah. So on this bird, there's that patch. There's probably a technical word for the laurel patch, but that tuft of feathers right in front of the bill there. It's whitish on this bird. It's really quite brownish on a ladder-backed woodpecker. Also, see how the spots are really quite black on a nice white background. I'm talking about the spots on the flanks. They would be kind of dusky gray on like a tan background on a ladder-backed woodpecker. Another nice mark that you just can't see, unfortunately, here is the, well, you can see a little bit of it here. See how the, I wish I had a pointer here, but the uppermost part of the back, the part that right before it gives way to that little white patch is really solidly black. As it is on the Nuttles woodpecker, and it's much sort of white, much more whitish or sort of broken or white and black on a ladder-backed woodpecker. So anyhow, if you tell me that this bird is like completely out of range for Nuttles, I'll actually be sort of surprised. Although they do vagrate a little bit. But
I have a location.
Oh, you have a location.
San Dimas.
San Dimas,
which is in Los Angeles County.
Oh, Los Angeles County. Okay, so that it all adds up then for Nuttles woodpecker. So yeah, it's a small woodpecker, formerly in the genus Picoides, but now it's in the genus Dryobates, and it's the ladder-backed woodpecker look-alike, usually separable by range, but in California, and by the way, far western Nevada, you get some Nuttles woodpeckers there as well. You need to look at other marks, and again, the general black and whiteness of this bird compared to the sort of black, beige, and whiteness of the ladder-backed woodpecker.
Yes, I agree. If you could change Nuttles woodpecker's name away from the eponym, do you think California woodpecker would be an appropriate name? That's the one that always struck me as the right name. It's sort of the analog of the Arizona woodpecker, which used to be Strickland's woodpecker. Right. Now Arizona. Well, I guess there's Strickland's. That was a split, but
sure, that's fine. There are a lot of birds already called California. I think there are maybe 7 such birds in the ABA area. So but sure,
California birders would say that it's a sign of the incredible diversity and endemism of California.
Yeah, so the California list is well over 650 now. I think maybe approaching 670 or something like that. So amazing number of birds out there. So yeah, California woodpecker would be a suitable placeholder. We might come up with something a little bit better afterwards. But
all right.
Anyhow,
one last photo. Right. We have a sparrow here from Arizona. We're staying in the west, in the southwest. And I'll tell you, Ted, this photo kind of threw me a little bit when I first saw it.
Yeah. Do we have a time of year on it?
Recently.
Oh, recently. Okay. Yeah. So, sorry, did you say it was a sparrow?
March. Yes, it is a sparrow.
Okay. Right. I agree that it's a sparrow. I mean, it's your classic little brown job. And
if I were in the old world, I would call it a lark.
I
Looks
like
awfully
the
large.
conical bill on
Yeah.
that. Um, yeah, this is a difficult bird. There is a bird, by the way, called the house sparrow, which we know is not a sparrow. And the female house sparrow, I'll just say that her plumage sort of matches with this one. It's a fairly beige brown bird overall. But one thing that completely knocks um, house sparrow out of the running is the tail is way too long
Mm-hmm.
on this bird. So I think this is a long-tailed sparrow. It's quite buffy overall, at least it appears to be that way. It's the photos
Sand color
as you
too.
yeah, but well, I'm not even seeing buff. So like a canyon towhee comes to mind
Mm-hmm.
for me. It's a fairly buffy bird with a buffy throat and a little bit of an eye ring. All those marks add up to me for canyon towhee. But there's some things on. Oh, sorry, I should slow down. Towhee's a sparrow, just to be
Big
clear.
long-tailed
But
sparrow. Yeah.
yeah, canyon towhees though just have more field markage on them overall. They have like a streak of like a necklace streak across the breast and just sort of more going on in the cap and crown. So I don't think it's a canyon towhee. So now we get into sort of a funny realm here of two birds that actually aren't even that closely related to each other, but their plumages are very similar. They're the a Cassin sparrow and the Brewer's sparrow. And you know, when you see them in real life, and better yet, if you hear them singing, they're so different. The Brewer sparrow is a tiny bird with a long tail and a very sort of pot-bellied look to it. So that's good for Brewer sparrow here. It's got a bit of a streaked crown and a eye ring, and I can see both. I think what do we call those? A submustachial and a malar stripe there. So those are all good marks for Brewer sparrow, but this bird is way too warm colored to me for a brewer sparrow. Brewer sparrows are cold and gray, and um, I know there it's all degrees of difference with sparrows, but their faces are also more prominently marked. So I'm having a hard time saying that this isn't a Cassin's sparrow. Cassin's
Mm-hmm.
sparrow is a sort of ruddyish, brownish, grayish bird overall like this. It also has a bit of an eye ring and a streaked crown, and it shows those weak stripes on the face as well. So it's funny, if we were in Arizona together, we would just listen to it or watch it on the ground or compare it in size to other birds. So Cassin sparrow is a fairly big
No,
bird, and
no
Brewers.
holistic birding here,
Yeah, I
Fred.
know. Yeah,
It's
so
bad. It's photos only.
yeah,
No
no,
other
I
clues.
I get that. So I just don't like the color on this at all for Brewer
I
sparrow.
agree.
But other than that, it adds up for Brewer sparrow. And again, I don't in any way mean to knock the photographer, but you get funny light or a funny camera setting or do something weird in post processing, and it's incredible how like a Plumbeus vireo can become a blue-headed vireo or vice
That's when it's a free
versa. And
fall in the east.
yeah, so we actually a bit of an aside here, but we had a vireo in Wyoming a couple of springs ago that just all you had to do was tweak like the saturation and the sharpness on the photo. And we think it was a Cassins. You absolutely could go back and forth between a blue-headed and Plumbeus on that Vireo. So if we could tone down the sort of the warm colors here, the earth tones, I'd be comfortable with this as a Brewer sparrow. But because it's so rufescent overall, I'm not prepared to say it's not a Cassin sparrow. And incidentally, unlike that finch that we had earlier, where we completely agreed on the genus, these birds aren't in the same genera at all. The Brewers is a Spizella sparrow, so it's like related to the
Mm.
chipping sparrow. And then the Cassins is, I think, now in the genus Pusea. Do I have that? I think that's the
Yes.
new genus. So it's related to like a Boteri's sparrow. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, Greg Neese is in the comments. He makes a point. You can see the tail pretty well if Cassin Sparrow has barring on the tail. If it was there, we would probably be able to see it. So I'm while you're talking, I'm actually pulling up eBird and scrolling through some Brewer sparrows, because I do frequently think of Brewers as much more of a gray bird, but there are some photos of them where they're pretty buff on the sides, and why they're as extensively buff as this bird is, it's very strange. And I wonder how much of that is because it's like puffed up against the cold or whatever, and so we're getting such a really weird impression of its body type. Because the Puasea sparrows are much chunkier and bigger and big-headed, whereas the little Spizellas like Brewers are kind of
right, and they're also
long.
sort of, that's a good point. They're also sort of distinctly flat-headed. And this has a nice sort of puffy round head. In fact, that crown looks really nice for a just too buff or too warm Brewer sparrow, and that's a nice point Greg's making about the barring on the tail. When I actually stretch in there, I can see that it's got a nice, plain, and very long tail. So I'll go with Brewers, but assuming we're right, and I'm not totally convinced of that, but assuming we're right, just a nice caution here about not reading too much into color, because color had me thinking, like house sparrow or canyon towhee at the very beginning. Hey, just a shout out to content in the imminent forthcoming March issue of Birding. Claire Stike has a really nice piece on the timberline sparrow, which is the distinctive, possibly separate species now classified as a brewer sparrow, but that breeds probably from sort of northern Montana up into southeastern, south central Alaska. And
highly
one of the cool things
too, isn't it?
Highly migratory, and it probably winters in southeastern Arizona, so or somewhere in Arizona. So if you think Brewers versus Cassins is a headache, wait till you have to deal with Brewers versus Timberline on the winter grounds, the winter ground of the latter of which we don't even know where it occurs right now. So anyhow, I'm good with this as a Brewers, but there's something funky about the color of this bird.
Yeah, agree. If anyone has any questions, that's our last bird. If anyone has any questions about birds,
thank goodness,
birding, I know we're right on time. Questions about birds or birding or whatever, feel free to throw them in the comments. We've had a pretty good discussion about a lot of these birds in the What's This Bird Facebook group, and I'm trying to keep an eye on all the other things. Stephen Gollin on the YouTube link with regard to the woodpecker notes that ladder-backed would have a wider cheek as well.
So was that whiter or whiter?
Whiter. White.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Cool. As in the color. Yeah.
Got it.
Sorry, my Midwestern slurring.
That's cool. That's fine.
Whiter. So there's another point in favor of Nuttles Woodpecker there. Let's see. Chris Ortega in What's This Bird is trying to find all the birds that have California in their name.
Oh, yeah.
Quite a few.
Yeah. And then, of course, there are also the birds that have California in their specific, their scientific name as well, like the greater roadrunner, for example, or something like that. So, yeah, it's quite a, for some reason, the number 7 sticks in my mind, but I may be off on that.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, 7. 7 is correct. Towhee, Thrasher, gull, quail, scrub jay, condor, gnatcatcher.
Okay. So if California scrub jay, that's right. Now I'm thinking it must be 8. We didn't lose something, did we? Because that number 7 sticks in my mind from pre-California scrub jay split, but report in on this next week, I suppose. But,
Anyway, Trisha Lombardi has a question.
Okay.
She and a few other photographers spotted a cinnamon teal at Merritt Island, Florida, 12,000 miles east of its normal range. Why do you think this is? 1,200. Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe 12,000 if you go the other direction.
Yeah. That'd be 24,000. But okay. So, sorry and all that. What was the question again?
How unusual is that?
Quite unusual.
Why do you think that happens?
Well, okay. So it's very unusual. The cinnamon teal is a bird that basically sort of occurs where it's supposed to. It's not one of these birds like Gargany that routinely wanders far out of range. So that's a really nice sighting. I'm sorry, did you say Merritt Island?
Merritt Island in Florida, yeah.
Yeah. I guess I'm assuming, maybe I shouldn't, that it's a drake, a beautiful cinnamon bird with the red eye.
That would probably be a safe assumption, given that's the most likely one to be spotted.
Yep. Well, as to what, sorry about that, as to why, I have 2 glib responses. The first is back to that quip that birds have wings and they use them. So the cinnamon teal is a highly migratory duck. It's what we call a complete migrant. The wintering ranges and the breeding ranges are almost non-overlapping. So they have a long ways to fly, and birds sometimes get confused. So one bird hung a right when it should have hung a left. So it went to Florida instead of Idaho or somewhere like that. The time of the year is perfect. The male cinnamon teals are on the move right now, so that makes sense. As to why it might have happened, now we're getting into philosophy, but just one comment I want to make here, because it's sort of a soapbox of mine. It's been one for 30 years now, is that just because birds show up in the wrong place and they do so over and over again doesn't necessarily mean that it's good for the population or selected for genetically or anything like that. Birds just make mistakes. And by the way, humans make lots of mistakes as well. So the idea that vagrancy, because it's so pronounced, is some sort of like pre-adaptation for expanding to new ranges is to me, a sort of classic evolutionary just so story. I don't believe it. I just think birds make mistakes. We often wander to the wrong place as well. We humans are very good at that, actually. So my guess is it made a mistake and that there was no particular good reason or evolutionary explanation for it at all. It went right when it should have gone left is the best I can say. And by the way, a very nice find in Florida for sure.
Yeah, we have a few records in North Carolina as well. Not that many though. She mentioned, climate change might play a factor. Maybe, hard to say. But I think that vagrancy in general is something that has happened pre-climate change. Will likely happen.
Thank you. Yes, I was just
change as well.
Sure. So, birds sort of arriving in new places because of vagrancy may find themselves exploiting and taking advantage of climate change. But vagrancy has been well documented for as long as people have been watching birds. Actually, there's some fascinating records of vagrants to what we now call the UK from hundreds of years ago, and the record's sort of poor, but it nevertheless is it's documentary. So birds go the wrong way, and as far as we know, they've been doing it for a long time.
Indeed. All right. Well, we are coming up on 1 hour, and barring any other questions online, I think we'll probably wrap this up. But I do want to say before we do so, if you enjoy these sorts of programs or any of the other kind of free ID birdie sort of stuff that the ABA provides, please consider joining the ABA. The link is up there up on the top, aba.org/join. We have a number of different memberships that perhaps will fit what you want to get out of the organization. You can help us provide these sorts of things, and also you get a wonderful magazine, a number of wonderful magazines, one of which is edited by my colleague Ted Floyd here. So aba.org/join. So check it out. We would certainly love to have you as a member. With that, I am probably going to say goodbye. We have done this for an entire hour with some good discussion. Thank you so much, Ted, for joining me. It's usually me or Ted or Greg, usually some combination of the three of us doing this show, and we'll be back in 2 weeks to do it again. So
well, Nate, thanks again for having me. And last minute's great. I actually kind of like the improvisational and extemporaneous aspect to it. If you all didn't notice, some of this came up on me at the last moment here, but I find that to be really it's entertaining for me, but it's also it's credible. I like kind of sort of being surprised by these images, and there's practically no coordination between me and Nate beforehand, as you probably figured out from some of the discussion. But
that's what makes it
thanks
fun.
Again. No, I think it's fun, and I think it's educational too. So thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and we will see you around on the internet. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.